Harlem in the late 1940s was not the Harlem you see in movies. Not just dark alleys, flashing guns, and men yelling over jazz music. Harlem was alive, breathing, watching. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, where reputation mattered more than money, and where respect could keep you alive longer than a gun ever could. This wasn't a neighborhood that belonged to outsiders. It didn't matter how much power you had downtown, or how many soldiers followed you in Manhattan. Harlem answered to its own rules, its own people, and its own king. In Harlem, you didn't need a crown to be king. You needed loyalty, and Bumpy Johnson had more of it than anyone alive. Bumpy didn't rule from some dark back room or hidden office. He didn't hide behind layers of bodyguards or send messages through intermediaries. He ruled openly, calmly, sitting in plain sight at Wells Restaurant on 135th Street, the same booth, the same time, day after day. Wells Restaurant didn't look like power. Red leather booths, checkered tablecloths, the smell of fried chicken and collard greens hanging in the air, jazz humming softly in the background, but everyone in Harlem understood what that place really was. Neutral ground, sacred ground. You could hate a man on the street, you could plan his downfall, you could even be at war with him. But once you stepped inside Wells Restaurant, you checked that hatred at the door. No guns, no threats, no violence. Because breaking the peace inside Wells wasn't just disrespecting a building, it was disrespecting Bumpy Johnson himself. And that was something nobody wanted to do. People came through those doors every day, musicians fresh off late-night gigs, preachers in press suits, numbers runners counting tomorrow's bets, politicians pretending they didn't know exactly who Bumpy was, even cops, some looking for coffee, others looking for favors. They all came for the same reason: protection, stability, order, because Harlem under Bumpy Johnson wasn't chaos, it was controlled. Violence wasn't random, it was calculated, and more often than not, it never happened at all. The real power wasn't the guns, it was the numbers game. To the outside world, it was illegal gambling. To Harlem, it was hope. Pennies, nickels, dimes, dropped into dreams. The chance that maybe this week would be different, that rent would get paid, that a child would get new shoes, that life might loosen its grip just a little. Bumpy didn't invent the numbers game. A brilliant black woman named Stephanie St. Clair did. Madam Queen. She built it when no one else would protect Harlem's money. And when the mob tried to take it from her, she turned to Bumpy. By the time the Italians came knocking in the 1940s, the numbers game wasn't just business. It was the bloodstream of Harlem. And Bumpy Johnson was its guardian. That's why he didn't hide. That's why he didn't flinch. And that's why when outsiders walked into Wells Restaurant thinking power came from fear, they quickly learned something else. In Harlem, power came from respect. Before Bumpy Johnson ever became the most powerful man in Harlem, before the Mafia whispered his name with frustration and fear, there was a woman who built the foundation of that empire. Stephanie St. Clair, known throughout Harlem as Madam Queen. Madame St. Clair wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, and she wasn't reckless. She was brilliant, disciplined, and fiercely protective of her people. In the 1920s, when Harlem was booming and opportunity was scarce for black communities, she created something that gave people a chance: the numbers game. It wasn't just gambling, it was survival. A few coins placed on hope, the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. And for years, Madam Queen ran it with precision, keeping money inside Harlem, keeping families fed, keeping outsiders out. Then came Dutch Schultz. Schultz wasn't interested in Harlem. He was interested in control. He brought violence where there had been order, intimidation where there had been structure. His men burned businesses, beat runners, killed without warning, and slowly, painfully, they began to squeeze Madame St. Clair out of her own empire. She fought back the only way she could, with words, with lawsuits, with newspapers, exposing police corruption and mob connections. But words only go so far when men with guns show up at your door. That's when she went to Bumpy Johnson. She didn't ask him to build something new. She asked him to protect what already belonged to Harlem. "Protect my operation," she told him, "and I'll give you power no one can take from you." Bumpy didn't rush. He didn't brag. He listened. And when he agreed, he kept his word. Where Dutch Schultz used fear, Bumpy used strategy. Where Schultz relied on brute force, Bumpy relied on relationships. He knew every block, every runner, every family that depended on that money, and slowly, methodically, Dutch Schultz lost his grip on Harlem. When Schultz was murdered in 1935, the Italians expected Harlem to fall into their hands. That's how it always worked. Power changed owners, but never direction. They were wrong. By the time the 1940s arrived, Bumpy Johnson controlled the entire numbers operation in Harlem. Millions flowed through his system every year, not stolen, not skimmed, but earned, protected, and respected. And that's when the Mafia truly began to hate him. The Italians didn't hate Bumpy because he was violent. They hated him because he proved something worse, that a black man could beat them at their own game, without becoming them. In their world, black men were supposed to work for the mob, take orders, collect scraps, not run empires, not say no, not win. But Bumpy Johnson did. And every dollar that stayed in Harlem, every Italian envelope that came back lighter than expected, reminded them of that truth. Harlem wasn't slipping from their control. They had never owned it in the first place. By the mid-1940s, the Italian Mafia understood one uncomfortable truth. Harlem wasn't cooperating. The numbers money wasn't flowing downtown the way it was supposed to, and every attempt to quietly absorb Bumpy Johnson's operation had failed. At first, they tried diplomacy. Frank Costello, the most powerful and calculating man in New York's underworld, believed everything had a price, including pride. He sent messages to Bumpy Johnson, invitations disguised as offers, partnerships dressed up as respect. Costello didn't threaten. He smiled. He talked about percentages, about peace, about everyone making money without bloodshed. Bumpy listened and said no, not loudly, not disrespectfully, just no. Harlem stays Harlem. That answer irritated Costello, but it didn't anger him. Not yet, because Costello understood something the others didn't. Harlem wasn't controlled by fear. It was controlled by loyalty. And loyalty couldn't be bought cheaply. Vito Genovese didn't share that patience. Genovese believed power was taken, not negotiated. His warnings were blunt. His messages carried weight, territory, consequences. He wanted Harlem folded into the Mafia structure like every other operation in New York, and he expected Bumpy to fall in line. Bumpy ignored him. That silence, that refusal to even acknowledge the threat, was louder than any insult. That's when Joe Bonanno stepped in. Bonanno wasn't interested in conversation. He believed respect came from bloodlines and obedience. And in his world, a black man running an independent empire wasn't just unacceptable, it was an insult. So Bonanno made a decision that would change everything. He sent his nephew, Sal the Butcher Bonanno. Sal wasn't a negotiator. He was a message, a man known for brutality, for making examples out of people who said no. Sending Sal wasn't about business anymore. It was about pride. When the Mafia stops talking and starts sending family members, that's not business anymore. That's ego. Bonanno believed fear would do what money couldn't, that Sal's reputation alone would bring Bumpy Johnson to heel. What Bonanno didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that Harlem didn't respond to outside fear. It responded to its own. And sending Sal into Harlem, into Bumpy Johnson's territory, into Wells' restaurant, wasn't a show of strength. It was a miscalculation. September 19th, 1948, a Sunday night in Harlem. The kind of night where the air felt heavy, not with danger yet, but with anticipation. Wells' restaurant was packed. 40 people, maybe more, every booth filled, every table occupied. Voices overlapped. Laughter drifted through the room, the soft clink of silverware against plates keeping time with the music. The jukebox near the wall played Dizzy Gillespie, low and smooth. Trumpet notes curling through the air like cigarette smoke. The smell of fried chicken, collard greens, fresh coffee. It all blended together into something familiar, something safe. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a living room for Harlem. Bumpy Johnson sat in his usual corner booth, the one with a clear view of both doors and the kitchen. He always sat there, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. Control was about awareness, and Bumpy never liked surprises. Across from him sat his wife, Mamie Johnson, elegant, composed, the kind of woman whose presence demanded respect without ever asking for it. She wasn't arm candy. She was a partner, and everyone in that room knew it. Bumpy was eating a ribeye steak, medium rare, cutting it slowly, precisely, no wasted movement, no rush. He ate the way he lived, controlled, deliberate, as if the world moved at his pace, not the other way around. Then, the door opened. At first, nobody reacted. The bell above the door rang like it always did, but something shifted in the room. A subtle change, like the air tightening. Sal, the butcher. Bonanno walked in first, 6'2", broad shoulders, muscle packed into a tailored suit. A man who looked comfortable, taking up space. Behind him came 6 men, spread just enough to block the entrance. Every one of them armed. You could see the outlines under their jackets. They weren't hiding it. That was the point. Conversation died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Chairs creaked as people stopped moving. Even the jukebox seemed quieter, like it understood something was wrong. Sal didn't scan the room. He already knew who he was there for. His eyes locked onto Bumpy's booth, and he walked straight toward it. No hesitation, no permission. The sound of his shoes against the floor felt too loud, each step stretching the silence tighter. He stopped at Bumpy's table, towering over him, looking down like Bumpy was something small, something temporary. "Bumpy Johnson," Sal said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We need to talk." Bumpy didn't look up. He didn't pause. He kept cutting his steak, slow, steady. The knife scraped softly against the porcelain plate, a sound that felt sharper than any gun in the room. "I'm eating," Bumpy said quietly. The silence deepened. Mamie Johnson lifted her eyes, calm, unblinking, locking them onto Sal's face, and for the first time since he walked in, Sal felt it. This wasn't his room. 6 armed men stood ready, fingers close to triggers, hearts steady from years of violence, and 40 unarmed people sat perfectly still, waiting. Sal didn't raise his voice at first. He didn't need to. His confidence filled the room the way smoke fills closed spaces. He talked about business, about ownership, about how Harlem's numbers game was Italian business now. Always had been, always would be. The offer came wrapped in insult, 10%, a consolation prize, permission to keep pretending to be important. Bumpy listened without looking up, finished cutting his steak, set the knife down neatly, dabbed his mouth with his napkin, calm, composed, untouched by the pressure in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was even, respectful, final. He declined. That's when Sal's patience broke. His smile disappeared, his words sharpened, and then he said it, the slur, the one word you never say to a black man in his own house, in front of his wife, in front of his people. The word didn't echo loudly. It didn't need to. It landed heavy, thick, poisonous. Mamie Johnson's fork slipped from her hand and struck the plate. A sharp metallic clink that cut through the room like a gunshot. Everything froze. No coughing, no breathing, no shifting in chairs. 40 people sat locked in place, not watching, not reacting, calculating, wondering if this was the moment the night turned bloody. Anyone else would have snapped. But Bumpy Johnson didn't survive Harlem by being emotional. Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't even frown. His expression stayed exactly the same, and somehow that made it worse. Because the men who knew him, the ones who understood what he was capable of, felt the temperature in the room drop, slowly, deliberately. Bumpy's right hand moved toward his vest pocket. Sal's 6 bodyguards tensed instantly, hands shifting under their jackets, shoulders tightening, ready to draw. But Bumpy didn't pull a gun. He pulled out his razor, the same straight razor he'd carried since he was 16, the same blade that built his reputation, the same piece of steel whispered about in prison yards and back rooms across New York. He placed it gently on the table, next to his steak knife, carefully, respectfully, as if it were part of the place setting. The message was unmistakable. Bumpy finally looked up. His eyes were calm, not angry, not excited, just focused. "You brought 6 men," he said quietly. "6 guns into my restaurant, and you think that makes you dangerous?" Sal tried to laugh, but it didn't come out right. Bumpy's voice never rose, never shook. "No," he continued, "it makes you ignorant." The razor stayed right there on the table, untouched, visible, waiting. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood something the Mafia hadn't. This wasn't a man reacting to disrespect. This was a man deciding how the night would end. Bumpy rose slowly from his seat. No sudden movements, no tension in his shoulders, just control, the kind that makes violence feel unnecessary. He didn't even look at the 6 armed men at first, as if they barely mattered. "You see these people?" Bumpy said quietly, his voice calm enough to be unsettling. He gestured around the room, not dramatically, just enough. "You think they're just customers, just folks eating dinner?" Sal glanced around, and for the first time since he walked in, something shifted behind his eyes. Bumpy took a step closer, unarmed hands visible, the razor still resting on the table behind him, untouched. "Let me explain something to you. That man by the door," Bumpy continued, "his name is Thomas. I paid his daughter's hospital bills when she almost died of pneumonia." He turned slightly, pointing with his chin. "That woman in the red dress, her husband used to beat her. I made sure he never did it again." Another step forward, slow, deliberate. "That kid washing dishes in the back. Cops tried to frame him for a crime he didn't commit. I kept him out of prison." With every sentence, the room felt heavier, not with fear, but with certainty. "These people don't owe me because I demanded it," Bumpy said. "They owe me because I earned it." Sal's bodyguards shifted, guns half raised now, unsure, uncertain. This wasn't the reaction they were trained for. No screaming, no panic, no chaos, just 40 people, silent, watching, waiting. "You brought 6 men into my house," Bumpy said, stopping just a few feet from Sal, close enough now. 6 guns, and you thought that made you powerful." He paused, letting the words settle. "I've got 40 soldiers." The silence stretched. "They're just not wearing suits." Sal swallowed. His eyes moved again, really looking this time. The cook near the kitchen doorway, the waitress gripping her tray a little tighter, the old man by the window, the young runner near the counter. None of them looked afraid. They looked ready. That's when Sal understood the trap. If a gun went off, even once, this wouldn't be a shootout. It would be an execution. 6 men, surrounded, blocked exits. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And even if they somehow made it out alive, Harlem wouldn't forget. Harlem wouldn't forgive. Bumpy leaned in slightly, his voice dropping lower, slower, more personal. "You can shoot me," he said calmly. "Maybe you kill me." Another pause. "But the moment you pull that trigger," he glanced around the room again, "you're not leaving this restaurant alive." Sal's hand trembled, just barely. But it trembled. "And even if you did," Bumpy continued, "even if you fought your way through that door, this is my city, every block, every corner, every alley." The words came slow, measured, unavoidable. "You're already dead, you just don't know it yet." The room was perfectly still. No music, no movement, just breath, shallow, controlled. And in that moment, the Mafia finally understood something they had never learned. This wasn't a man surrounded by civilians. This was a king standing among his people. The silence that followed was unbearable. No shouting, no movement, no sudden breath, just 40 people holding still, as if the room itself was waiting for permission to exist again. Bumpy stood there calmly, unarmed, unshaken. His face showed no anger, no triumph, just certainty, the kind that doesn't ask questions, Then Bumpy spoke, slowly, deliberately, each word placed exactly where it needed to land. "Your uncle will bury you tomorrow." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean in. He didn't threaten. And that's why it worked. Because it wasn't a warning. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't something that might happen. It was a statement of fact. Sal's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. In that moment, he understood exactly what Bumpy meant. If Sal pulled the trigger, if blood spilled in that restaurant, Joe Bonanno wouldn't declare war on Harlem. He would erase the problem. Sal wasn't just a nephew, he was a liability. The Mafia didn't protect pride, it protected power. And power never hesitates to bury its own mistakes. Sal believed Bumpy because Bumpy understood Mafia logic better than the Mafia expected. He knew how they thought, how they cleaned messes, how quickly loyalty disappeared when attention followed. That's why Sal backed down, not because he was weak, not because he was afraid of dying, but because he was afraid of dying alone, slowly. Sal lowered his weapon. His men followed, confused, stunned, embarrassed, for the first time in his career. Sal, the butcher Bonanno, chose survival over ego, and Harlem watched, silently, as a Mafia enforcer learned the most dangerous truth of all. Some power doesn't need to shout. 3 days after that night, Manhattan felt a subtle shift in its underworld. The 5 families convened an emergency meeting, voices sharp with frustration, hands clenched around cigars, eyes darting for someone to blame. Joe Bonanno wanted revenge. He wanted Harlem. He wanted Bumpy Johnson dead, and he wanted it now. But Frank Costello, the man who truly understood New York's criminal chessboard, spoke calmly, deliberately, cutting through the anger like a blade. "Bumpy Johnson runs Harlem because Harlem wants him to. We try to take it by force. We start a war we can't win, not because we can't kill him, because we can't kill 40,000 people who'll die for him. Leave Harlem alone." The room fell silent. Even the most aggressive bosses understood the truth in his words. Violence wouldn't take Harlem, not with its people loyal, watchful, ready. Harlem was a fortress, and Bumpy Johnson was its heart. From that night forward, the Mafia never tried to take over Harlem's numbers game again. They made deals instead of threats, negotiated instead of intimidated. Respect replaced fear because they had learned a lesson that no amount of bullets could teach. They didn't fear Bumpy Johnson. They feared Harlem standing behind him. And in those quiet weeks that followed, life in Harlem returned to its rhythm. Jazz flowed from the clubs. Families lived, worked, and thrived. Wells' restaurant remained neutral ground, and Bumpy Johnson sat in his corner booth, eating his steak, knowing that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it simply commanded obedience with presence, strategy, and loyalty. The Italians never forgot the night they walked into Harlem and met its king, and Harlem never forgot who ruled it. Power isn't loud. Power doesn't rush. Power doesn't need permission. Bumpy Johnson didn't prove his dominance with bullets or threats. He proved it with presence, strategy, and the loyalty of everyone around him. And after that night, nobody ever disrespected Bumpy Johnson in his own restaurant again. The Mafia learned a lesson they would never forget. Harlem had a king, and that king didn't need to fire a single shot to command respect. This is Bumpy Johnson, Circus, Decoding Dark History, where we tell the stories they tried to erase. If this story moved you, subscribe, because respect is everything.